I'm very, very lucky to be here with a wonderful panel, which I'll introduce you to in a minute. So for those that don't know me, I'm Helena, and I work for an organisation called Products of Change. We work with businesses to help them on their sustainable transformation. And we kind of really work peer-to-peer. So you would, if you joined Products of Change, you would meet similar businesses to yourself where can really share best practice and take you on your sustainable journey because, as we all know, sustainability is a very large conversation. And we're really lucky to be here working really closely with the Hive Group for their Power of One campaign. So if you haven't seen it, if you head to Hall 6, H40, you can see lots of brands that are producing amazing products, or they're sustainable or ethical or recycled materials. And then the Products of Change team is there. We've got some experts there that can answer any questions that you might have as well. And we're going to be here all week in Hall 6, H20. Right now, so let's get stuck in. I'm extremely privileged to speak to my two wonderful guests, Tom and Georgia today, and I'll introduce everybody to you properly in a minute. And we're going to be talking about the future of retail, but actually have a bit of a big disclaimer. Because we say sustainable retail, well, what we really mean is the future of sustainability and how we should be operating, because actually sustainability is about meeting the needs of tomorrow by not ruining it today. It's about us enabling to kind of have a healthy planet, and we don't want to ruin that for the future generations. So here we go. So I've got the wonderful Tom Savigar sat next to me, who is the founder of Avansere, and I guess you're going to tell us what that means later. Tom is actually a futurist. I love your title. He spent decades helping companies like L'Oreal, Sony, IKEA, Dyson, Lego, and UBS see around corners and shape their path forward. Now from his Norwegian-based boutique consultancy, Tom is now focusing on helping enterprises navigate the planet's changing climate in a meaningful way, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you in a little bit. And then we also have Georgia Bell, is sales and marketing manager at Co-Create, and have got their first product here at Autumn Fair to showcase, and we'll be talking about that later, the Honest Bottle. Georgia joined Co-Create in 2020 and is responsible for developing the business through creative thinking and effective communications via sales and marketing. Georgia's actually got 10 years experience in waste and recycling within marketing and sales, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about that, Georgia. And she's really passionate about sustainability, circular solutions, and turning what was once waste into usable product. Don't forget, our waste has value. So if we can unlock that value, it will enable us to actually fund more sustainable initiatives. So I'm looking forward to doing that. So Tom, let's kick off with you. So we're here to talk about the future of retail. But to enable us to do this, we really need to talk about the future of actually how we produce, how we peek over that fence to the next 5 to 10 years of kind of what conversations, what transformation, what legislation is starting to come down the line. I'm going to go on, I'm not done yet. This is one of the most evolutionary times, and actually a lot of people are saying that we've actually started the fourth industrial revolution, because that's actually how we operate has got to change so dramatically that actually in the next 10 years is going to look so different to how we do things today. So Tom, after all of that, it will transform retail and how we consume, and with the people that you're working with, how do you start to even show them the bigger picture of what's coming down the line?
Yeah. Okay, I think I'll start with a bit of a story. So my first and last ever job when I was 20 was in M&S in ladies' wear. And I asked a very stupid question, which is, where are we going as a company? And as a 20-year-old, you don't ask that question normally because your boss says, shut up and make the skirt. So I got fired and never went and had a job again. So very quickly, I was thrown into the London scene to try and sort of make sense of the future, because I wanted to understand the future. And a lot of reading, a lot of research, but to your point, how to try and communicate. It was really about communication. And I think the last 25 years, that sort of journey has been very interesting to try and help businesses understand where the future's going. And I have 3 kids who are under 12, and they're now my experts. So they teach me everything. So my 12-year-old is now starting to sort of, when we go to the supermarket or we go to a department store or go on holidays, she's asking questions more and more and more and more. Dad, why are we buying this? And Dad, why aren't we doing that? So I think a lot of the experience right now for me, I used to run a company in London for 15 years called the Future Laboratory, and clients like M&S and companies that we see here. And about 5 years ago, I was looking at all of the work that we were producing, which was strategies, which was giving companies direction and guidance and innovation. And there was this red thread throughout everything, which was sustainability. And as someone who I like to understand things and make sense of them, I didn't understand what this meant. I didn't know really what it meant. I thought, is it waste? Is it recycling? Is it plastic? Is it carbon? Is it water? Is it mental health? So I got my head around it, and in 2020, as a family, we moved to Norway, and Norway is pretty advanced when it comes to all things sustainable, even though they're the biggest or second biggest oil and gas producer, but that's a whole different conference. And I researched it, and I got my head around if I was to go and help a retailer or a company making things, what would I tell them? Because I'm not a scientist, I'm a design mind, but how can I help them understand this? And right now, I think as businesses, you are existing in a world that is increasingly, I call it Barney, which sounds like a strange use of letters, but it's quite a brittle world. So B is for brittle. It's quite brittle. We have a lot of systems in this world that can break very quickly, like a thin cup or something very quickly can break. You only have to look at something like food and how quickly, all of a sudden, in this country, because of the war. And then we have the A, which is for anxious. I don't know about you, but I think a lot more people in the world are anxious in various forms. And then you have the N, and that stands for non-linear, which things don't go in a straight line anymore. So, someone does something with a bat in China and off we go. What the hell was that all about? And then all of a sudden now we live on Zoom. And then incomprehensible, incomprehensible. Like every day I read the news and I'm like, I don't understand where this is all meant to go. So this Barney, B-A-N-I world it makes the job of something like sustainability really hard to communicate. Because when I turn up and talk to a company and say, we need to be more sustainable, they go, yeah, but right now in the world, there's a lot of chaos. So can you give me a quick answer? Is there a quick win? Is there something I can do right now? And we'll probably get onto that a bit later. And I think as retailers, it's to sort of open up, I guess, the conversation it's having this word resilience in mind. Resilience means being adaptive. And we all have a day job, most of us, and we have to think about payroll, or we have to think about diversity, or we have to think about tax, or we have to think about droughts, or we have to think about stuff right now, and at the same time see the summit at the top of a mountain that is sustainability, and somehow balance the two. And that's not easy, and that's really resilient thinking, and it's quite mind-boggling to do that. So, and I think the word transformation is really important. I've been working with a retailer in Norway which is like an affordable product retailer. And you go in there, and it's the kind of place you go and buy 20 disposable plates for your kids' parties, that kind of thing. Really important retailer in Norway, and one of the fastest growing retailers in a country that's quite wealthy. People need affordable stuff still. But the problem is it goes in the bin, or usually in the forest or in the lake. And they came to me and said, we've got a big problem. Is it our responsibility to take care of that? Which you'll talk about waste a lot more than me. And I said, I think so. But what is it you're going to do? And they said, well, should we make everything recyclable? And I said, that's one thing. But I said, I think you need to change the definition of retailing. And now I'll stop in a second, which is retailing is about usually selling. And I've just changed their whole purpose to being guiding. So they're about guiding choice. They're not about selling product. And they've now got to get used to what that means, because they're now a service business. They're not a retailer. And all of a sudden, the CEO is now going, oh, I've got something to say to the press now, something exciting. So it's, I think there's a lot of training that I find with businesses. They're starting to rethink, what is it I'm actually doing here?
Well, we got so used to, like you've said, that linear economy where we take and we make and it all gets thrown away, and then nothing happens to bring any of that back. And actually, when you look at a retailer, retailers are service providers. They're there to provide a service to the people. We go there to buy stuff, but do you actually have to buy something, or could you rent something or refill something? You know, there's loads of different business models that are out there that actually are there to, that, you know, if you started that business model, you as a business could actually benefit from being at the head of that new way of working, of the new way of doing things. But it's about switching the mindset and opening your eyes to the possibilities, and then figuring out actually how you get there.
No, and I'll stop now, but one more thing. And I think, but it's also about adjusting how you view money, because if you're not making transactions as your primary business, and it's not about the cash, I don't know what, the cash till, or that's some sort of jukebox thing. If you're not doing that as your metric for success every week, then what are you measuring? And I think that's the problem I hear is, thanks, Tom, but how do we make money then? If that's, and is it about money, or is it about tree hugging? I'm sorry, so there's a lot of reactions when you say this. Yeah.
And I have that, and I'll come to you in a minute, Georgia, as well. I have that when I talk to brand owners, because actually a lot of brand owners are used to having money in, but actually where does the value sit within a business? Because brand owners in the marketing team are spending a huge amount of money pushing marketing, then you've got the product team pushing a huge amount of money pushing product. But actually, if the products aren't sustainable, what will start to happen is maybe those products will start to slow down in sales. But if you switch the value and you make a sustainable product, and that becomes part of your marketing if you're doing the right thing, and you look at it as a whole business, suddenly you start to transform different. And I guess that's what you guys are doing as well, isn't it? Brings me into you, Georgia, really nicely. So I'd love to come and talk about co-create a little bit more, because actually what you're doing is just so super interesting. So you're looking at future innovations, you're looking at systems design, you're looking at waste and recycle, the circular production, which you got your first circular product with us here today. And we know that if we are to continue to produce for a growing and global population, we've got to look at producing in a regenerative way, because actually the resources that we use are running out. You know, that's not something that so we need to find a way to bring those resources back into enabling us to produce, so actually business can continue. Can you tell me more a little bit about the journey that you guys have been on at Co-Create with the Honest Bottle as well?
Yeah, no, of course. So my two co-founders, James Capel and Peter Goodwin. James used to own a company called Simply Waste Solutions. So it was actually the UK's first zero to landfill waste management company. So really thinking about doing things differently. And Peter worked for Closed Loop, who again is completely centred around circular economy and helping clients get to that circular economy and away from that linear cycle. So all of us being in the waste and recycling industry, we have seen, copious amounts of single use and products that are just disposed of and just thrown away. So what we wanted to do is focus on the circular economy and how we can essentially create value from waste. So Co-Create as a business, we've got 3 business divisions. So one, system design, which is essentially, Peter's knowledge, sustainability consulting, helping brands with hard-to-recycle products and trying to create value from them and getting them back into new products. We've got our waste and recycling stations, so looking at internal waste collection systems differently. So we launched a product this year called the R-Bin, and that's an internal waste bin made from 70% recycled plastics. So looking at different ways to engage the user and with no contamination and being able to get that waste back so you can get value from it. And then our first circular product is the Honest Bottle, which is who we are exhibiting with today. So we created the brand Honest. And the Honest Bottle is the only reusable bottle that's been designed and made in the UK from recycled single-use bottles. So the bottle is made from recycled PET, which is water bottles, Coke bottles, and then the lid is made from recycled HDPE, which is essentially milk bottles. This is our first time in the product space. We've obviously been service focused, so it's really interesting to be here and to be launching this product. And we've had some great feedback so far, so it is really exciting. And everything's obviously, of course, made in the UK, so getting that UK source recycled material. So all of this is UK sourced too. Yeah. Creating the value out of what is once waste.
But I love that, right? You normally don't have a technical team within a waste recycling thinking, actually, we're processing all of this waste. Like, let's create some product from it. Let's create a business from that. And we're starting to see that pop up even in, like, waterworks are starting to grow algae that can then go into making, like, an algae plastic. It's quite amazing to see the service industry actually looking at if there's value within that sector as well, which I know, again, could be a whole different power conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, so back in, I think it was 2014, so Peter and James actually came together, Closed Loop and Simply Waste, and created a scheme called the Simply Cup scheme, which was the UK's first paper cup recycling scheme. So waste companies had sort of looked at it beforehand, and there was, groups coming together sort of trying to maybe do something, but not really actually do anything about it. So it was trying to find out if we could, also make it commercially viable to collect paper cups and recycle them in the best way and then create circular products out of them. Yeah. So that was the scheme that sort of, brought them together, and then, that's when Co-Create was formed on the back of that.
And there's a lot of waste out there. I don't know if anybody's heard of the brand Rayburn, but Rayburn, everything that they produce from stock, from military. So they produce the most amazing coats from silk parachutes. It's amazing. So they're not actually having to buy from scratch. There's an amazing company that are making beautiful kids' bags from old bouncy castles. So there's so much waste out there that can be valuable to new product that obviously is cheaper to buy as a material because it's somebody's waste. And actually, with the world changing and materials going up and shipping going up, to actually find somebody locally that you could go and get some materials from that could go into production. I mean, to me, that makes total business sense. Why would you not do that?
Yeah, it's all about, finding the local solutions. Yeah. I think there was a stat of something like 20 to 30% of greenhouse emissions are from the transportation and production of exported goods.
Yes.
So finding that local solution, getting the materials locally, and using recycled material is material that's already in the market, so you don't have to use that energy to produce it, and obviously sourcing raw materials like oil to create new plastics.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can, and I'm sure because it's materials there already, you haven't. At the minute, people are buying a year in ahead, but actually then they're being told that, well, we haven't got that product for you, so then you can't deliver to the retailer, then the retailer finds you, and you get a big knock-on effect. So looking at ways to do things differently can massively benefit business, but it's just understanding, lifting your head up and asking around to see what else is out there. Tom, you're a design, you came from design, and I know a stat that I've got is that 95% of a product's carbon footprint is designed at the at the design phase. It's quite fascinating when you think that it's not necessarily all in the end of the life of the products, it's actually how you think of producing the product in the first place. And I'd be really interested to understand from you, with the clients that you're working with, kind of what are the roadblocks that you're seeing that are stopping them from actually moving forward to doing things differently?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest roadblocks is people, the way that this is communicated, I thought was interesting. I think there needs to be more examples. So they need to feel excited. I'm very good at making people feel excited about stuff that hasn't happened yet. That's been my job for a long time, whether it's the metaverse or sustainability. Or I genuinely think that there needs to be a feeling of excitement and urgency. And of course, the pandemic was one example that made a lot of people think about some things more urgently than ever before. And I think the drought this summer in this country, the pictures from space, all those sorts of things, is just continuously showing people, especially leaders of businesses, that some things might have to change.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest hurdles are very much about how businesses can, I said it before, about how they can handle the near and the far with the present day. And I think balancing eventualities, so I can go in and do a 30-minute presentation or send a report or do a webinar, and many of us do that, and we talk about these things like we're doing today, but very quickly making it relevant and tangible, and how to make sure that then a business knows one thing they can do in the next hour or by tomorrow morning, or because they have companies to run. There are two things that I find that often make a client get off their seat, which is legislation. And there's some interesting stuff happening in the EU if we're just talking about Europe, which means that it will be illegal. So that's my final card when I haven't got a client who's listening. I go, well, if I'm going to show you how illegal it's going to be to have plastic in your value chain, or to create waste, or to create emissions, or and then they go, oh, okay, that's quite serious, isn't it? But I try and leave that card for the final hurdle, because I believe that if you use like nudge theory, that's the final thing you should do, like the congestion charge, versus the 5 steps before it, which is make them want to do it in a good way. And I think peer pressure is good. So often, if I'm working with companies, I'll say, this is your competitor, they're really moving fast, or we do a survey of their consumers and we say, you know what, a lot of them want this, you just haven't provided it yet. And then sometimes you're surveying employees and saying, there's a lot of unhappy people in your company and they really want you to do this. And when you put all 4 of those things, employees, consumers, legislation, and competitors all on the table, a company usually moves pretty quickly to change. But I think I think the main thing is probably making it digestible. You know, I think it's a very complex thing. Like you're very, very experienced in you explain what you do in circularity really simply. And I think when you look at the side of your packaging, lightweight, easy carry, leak-proof, BPA-free, hand wash only, plus the other ones down there, and really spelling it out so that if you're talking to a business and internally, making these benefits really clear, and hopefully at some point the consumer goes, I also understand what you're talking about, because it's not easy to understand this stuff. And I think that it does feel like in the next coming years, a lot of us are going to be a bit sweatier. This is going to be hard work, because we're going to have to take the 20th century out of our minds, the way things used to be, and say we need to rethink how we work. And the 9 to 5, I don't think will exist. I think it will be, if you're really passionate, there is no downtime for this. Or we're here on a Sunday, for example. So I think it's you have to really want to do this, but then the benefits they're going to be amazing. So,
and I know actually, I don't know if anybody ever reads the Global Risk Report. It's obviously a risk report, so it's not happy reading. But actually 7 out of the top 10 global risks are all climate related. So this isn't going away. You know, the uncertainty that we've had in business isn't going away.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out how to kind of de-risk our businesses, and actually looking at implementing a lot of these practices will enable you to de-risk. I know a lot of retailers, because they were gearing themselves up for Brexit, actually were ready for COVID, because there were so many things that they'd put in place. So it's kind of starting early gives you the competitive advantage, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, actually, in Norway is the Norway consumer is the second most climate cynical in the world. So you'd think Norwegians are all these sustainability passionate people. They're not. They are really wasteful. They eat a lot of meat and all sorts of other things. Yeah, they recycle, so that's one thing. But they don't. When you ask the average Norwegian, it's Saudi Arabians, Norwegians, and then Americans are the top 3 out of all the countries in the world that don't really think they have a responsibility to do anything.
I know. And
So-
America's that's a scary one, because actually they consume so
Exactly.
much.
But until this summer. So this summer, these ski slopes, the snow disappeared much quicker than any other year before. And all of a sudden, they surveyed them again. And the Norwegians went, oh, the climate change is really quick now. So because they can't ski, they're now getting their skates on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, sometimes you need to give them something that people care about, which is you won't be able to ski every year. Oh, fine, let's take this seriously.
Yeah. We don't want to lose our skiing. It's part of our heritage.
Yeah.
George, I'm really interested, because as a business, you're really taking action. You're looking at how you take waste, drive action, and really start to drive awareness to consumers as well through your closed loop and circular systems. But actually, a lot of people don't really know what the circular economy is. Are you able to kind of, I know that before you kind of said it quite basic, are you able to kind of expand a little bit upon that?
Yeah, I mean, well, putting it simply, at the moment, a lot of our processes and production are completely linear. So they go in a straight line and they create waste. But what the circular economy is essentially designing out waste. So designing products that, are made from, say, example, recycled material, can be recycled again and can be made back into that same product or other products that can be used again and again. So, yes, that's putting it fairly simply.
But it's fascinating though, because we kind of band around these terms, but actually we talk about it, but actually does everybody quite understand what that means?
Well, you said that like these are made from things like Coke bottles and stuff, and I think the fact that those sorts of companies don't necessarily think like in a circular way, you're thinking, thanks very much for the materials.
Exactly.
Thanks, Coca-Cola.
Because there's so much of it. Exactly.
Exactly. And they're already in there. And, funnily enough, the bottles themselves are actually made at a manufacturer that makes the Coke bottles as well.
So interesting.
So, it is interesting. Taking that material that's already in the market and that's already been made by those bigger companies and then using it for products like this that can be reused. So, obviously, reuse is prevention, and then you've got reuse and then recycling on the waste hierarchy, and obviously you're always striving to go up the waste hierarchy. And then being able to recycle that product again. This can be recycled in household collections, so actually making it easy for the consumer to recycle it, because I think we're going to go on to it, but in terms of greenwashing, sort of sustainability is like a trend at the moment, and of course it's something we need to take seriously. But a lot of brands are, sort of jumping on this trend and then fooling the consumer. So you've got the consumers that actually, and, businesses that do want to do good and are believing things that are on the labels, or, just putting the word sustainable in front of your brand or your product doesn't make you sustainable. So you've got the brands here that, need to do better. And need to communicate, and so that the consumers aren't being fooled and thinking they're doing something right and buying something that they think is good when it actually isn't. So I think that's where, in terms of like the communication, I think we're going to go on to for the Honest Bottle. That's why we wanted our brand name to be honest, because our whole approach is to be honest and to be transparent, and we say that we're not completely perfect, but we're trying to get there, and we want to do things well, we want to do things better. I think sustainability is just better business.
And I really love the way that you've used a material that's highly recycled in the majority of places. And even some of the retailers that we work with in Products for Change are actually starting to have a red, amber, green list of materials that they will accept. So, PVC in the future will not be accepted, but they've said this is our roadmap, and at this point we won't accept this material because actually that can't be recycled. So, and they're reducing the amount of plastics that they are happy to take in store, because actually if we all start to use the plastics that can be recycled in the infrastructure that already exists, even if recycling is the last thing we should be doing, because obviously it's very energy intensive, if it does go in the recycling bin, it can be recycled, because I think something like 9% of plastics get recycled globally. That's it. So we all put it in our recycling bin going, yay, we've done our job, and like the majority of it is not getting recycled. It's going and it's being burned. So it's so I love that you've used something that actually is already within that system. And what makes this, I guess that's a big reason of why that makes it different to so many other bottles that are out there.
I mean, obviously we're in a saturated market. There's a lot of reusable bottles out there, but we are the only reusable bottle that's been designed and made locally in the UK from UK source recycled material and can be completely recycled at end of life. So that's how we see ourselves, as being different. And I think it is that whole local solution. There's lots of reusable bottles out there, and not to name any, but that claim that they are sustainable and claim that they can be recycled, 100% recyclable. But how brands can get away with that is that the materials that they've used, say in the bottle or in the product, can be recycled somewhere in the world, but the likelihood of it actually getting there is very, very small. And then, being from the waste industry, I know that it's what you would call like a composite materials, where you have a product and it's got different materials that are put together. So you need to separate those materials so that they can be recycled in their correct ways separately. So if you've got a product that's got, quite a few different materials and it can't be easily separated, then it's just going to go in general waste.
And that can that all go in together? It all gets shot down because they're different materials. Do they kind of float at different, one more dense than the other? Is that how you? So
what this is, this is made from recycled PET. And this is made from recycled HDPE. Both are widely accepted in all household recycling collections. So when you're finished with the bottle, obviously it is made to be reusable, so it's not a single-use product. You just need to separate the strap from the lid and the bottle, Lid and the bottle can just go into the bin at home, recycling. And then we've got a free take-back scheme for the strap, because the strap is TPU, which can be recycled, but it needs to be recycled in bulk. So if you put that into your recycling bin, that's just going to get thrown out at the other end. So what we want to do is take responsibility for that. You send it back to us, and then when we have enough, we will recycle it. Yeah.
Love it. So fascinating, isn't it?
But the greenwashing thing, I think, is it's a bit like the same as, say, someone making a product says, I've made a yellow top, and then you get it and you go, but it's red, and you said it was yellow. It's as basic as that.
Yeah.
Or you said it was wool, and it's not. It's cotton. So getting it wrong is as literal as that. And I think this is where greenwashing, there's been a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm to have a go, and they haven't done their homework, and then they've said something, and then especially textile companies right now, they're withdrawing a lot of their collections that have this eco-green labeling because it's actually wrong. And it's not that I think these companies have tried to do anything bad. They've just got on and done it quickly without doing it properly.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're a startup, if I can say that,
Yeah.
I think a lot of very senior individuals who used to run the big companies in the world are starting again from scratch with their homework done.
Yeah.
And I call it story doing, not storytelling. So when they do tell their story, it's actually what they do.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of almost reset of the speed of getting communications out the door, because the PR teams and the marketing teams, the store teams, they want to have, they need something to say, and they can't wait for the sustainability science people to make it easy to understand. So they rush something out the door, and then of course the legislators or the consumer does their homework and says this not actually whatever it's meant to do.
Yeah.
And then then distrust happens, and then all of a sudden brand has a problem, and so I think it's a really interesting time to sort of get the story straight. And I on a scale of different stages of becoming sustainable, I think I'd say probably 99% of businesses right now are responsible. So they're learning about this. They know they have to do it now. They want to do it. They're trying to learn what it is. And the way that they should be communicating it is just with honesty. I think you said the right word.
Yeah.
Saying like, let's be really clear. We don't have all the answers. We're trying. We're doing this bit over here, this bit in that market. And we're not going to do broad brush statements. We're going to be very specific. And no big numbers like by 2050 we'll be carbon neutral. That means nothing to an average household. They don't know what that means. So they need to know specific things. And then it's a conversation.
Yeah.
And to say, you know what, we've done some more work and we're now this far ahead. And if I was you, in terms of the audience, don't use round numbers. Don't use years like 2030, 2050. Go for really awkward numbers. Like by 2028 and a half, will be 27% recyclable. But I think it's very, very easy to say 50% by 2030. And I think that actually creates distrust. I think consumers then go, that's really, how do you know that? Yeah.
Well, most of them don't know how they're going to do it.
No.
Which it's like, how do you find that balance then between a company saying, right, we really want to try and do the best that we can, so let's put some big actions in place, because it actually gets people pushing forward, to then actually the everyday of how you nudge towards that, and then how you communicate it effectively and correctly.
Yeah.
Because actually, like you said, a lot of the time, it's a marketing team that's been using it to help sell a product, because, we're all here mostly to sell product. But actually, you've got to be truthful at the same time. And I think a lot of people are greenwashing by accident, not on purpose. Yeah. And then we're kind of getting to the point where people are green hushing. So they're kind of actually scared to say anything. But actually, if they're scared to say anything, then are they then going to be doing the work in the background? So there's a middle ground somewhere in there, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, I think retailing is going to be increasingly about almost the return of the shopkeeper. So the two Ronnies, that kind of moment. Those of you who know the two Ronnies, some of you look quite young, so you probably think, who's Ronnie and who's Ronnie? But the idea of that moment of you walk into a shop and that shopkeeper knows what a fork handle is and what fork handles are. Very different. And they actually know how to explain. Some of you are laughing because you know the joke.
I got it.
And they can explain what's on the shelf. And I think that intimacy with your value chain, knowing the numbers, knowing where something's come from, knowing your suppliers, and if someone says, can you tell me a bit about what's made in China or Portugal or wherever it's made, you go, or the UK, you go, yep, here's the paperwork.
Yeah.
And I think the consumer, because of Instagram and Snapchat and WhatsApp and TikTok and all this stuff, you know, my kids are certainly now building their identities based on what they say. So my daughter's got some Converse trainers, they're recycled. She asked for them specifically because she knows her mates are going to say, where are they from? And she goes, they're recycled, and they're going to go, that's cool.
Yeah.
And she might win brownie points with her friends. So more and more, the kind of personal points and prizes is going to happen. And one of my future predictions a long time ago was, you know, you want to get a mortgage rate in the future or a loan or an insurance policy, it will be based on your carbon footprint. And it's already happening in Sweden. So in Sweden now, everyone's bank accounts have a carbon calculator next to them.
Wow.
So if you want to buy a car or you want to get an insurance policy or something where you need to get credit, they're going to look at you and say, but you've flown 3 times this year, Tom. And I know your Greece holiday was nice, but we can't allow you to have that insurance premium.
Isn't that crazy?
It's happening.
Just from your carbon.
And that's in obviously a country like Sweden where the Swedish have said, let's be honest about this. Let's, as a citizen, why not bring the future forward?
Yeah.
So yeah, wait for that to hit the UK.
I was going to say, with everything else. George, I was going to ask if you had any issue with people asking you questions about the honest bottle, or have you got full visibility over everything? So if anybody did ask you, you're like, yep, there's the information.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, I think, well, sort of touched on it, but in terms of, like, probably communicating well and being up against brands that do greenwash.
Yeah.
So like I said, obviously our whole approach is to be honest. But, you know, some of the things that we can say on here that we know are completely 100% true, we are doing, and, you know, it can be recycled easily. It is actually made from recycled material. Also up against products and brands that say the same thing, but maybe they're not so true. Maybe they have a small bit of truth in. So, yeah, I've had, you know, there are lots of different questions and they're starting to hit us. Even the fact that, you know, we're using packaging. So I had someone did a really good LinkedIn post actually recently saying how much they loved our product, which was great. But, you know, we had lots of comments on there from sustainability consultants and whoever trying to pick it apart, which is fine. Like, we welcome it. That's fine. Like, because I actually contacted the guy that wrote the post because he said, you know, he calls out a lot of greenwashing. And I said, you know, I'd actually want you to sort of investigate our product. Like, here you go, like almost like a bit of a challenge, which he absolutely loved. And he says, you know, passed with flying colours, which is, amazing. But all of these comments on here, and someone said, oh, well, it's in a box. And I was like, okay, yeah, no, totally get that. And we agree, we're not 100% perfect. However, because this is so lightweight, if this was just to sit on a shelf,
Bounce around.
it would fall over. And also, where is the messaging being able to be communicated? So we need something like this. It's UK sourced and it's 100% recyclable. But otherwise, no one would actually know what the product's about. And it's funny, actually, when we were looking at the packaging, because every part of the design process, like, this product was genuinely designed with sustainability at the forefront and at the heart. A lot of products are designed with sustainability sort of fitted in on top.
Yeah.
So obviously we needed a functional, good product, but with sustainability as the focus. And when we were looking at the packaging, we were like, well, we need it to be recycled. We need to use recycled material. And when we started to look into the packaging and looked at recycled packaging, any of the ones that were actually commercially viable were coming from thousands of miles away. So one we looked at was, okay, it's recycled, but it's coming from the US. So we went, okay, so what do we do? Well, we don't want something that's being flown in from the US just so we can put that label on that says recycled. Instead, let's use something that's UK sourced and, you know, no plastic and can be used and can be completely recycled.
Yep.
So it's just making those decisions and really thinking about
Sometimes
it.
the system isn't ready, as you say.
Exactly.
That the UK is not the recycled centre of the world, but it could be. You know, it's a new economy.
Well, even I think our pulp even our recycled pulp comes from, most of it comes from Germany, then comes over here, and then that pulp gets to make recycled paper. Then people are saying it's made in the UK. Well,
exactly.
it is.
You can get away with that if you get everything here and then you put it together in the UK. You can get away with it assembled in the UK, made in the UK. Yeah.
It's like in Sweden that they now import waste because they've run out. So,
because they've got such a good system.
I don't work for the Swedish government, by the way.
I love that. That's what we need to get to because we've got so much of it. I know we haven't got a huge amount of time left, and Rosanna will be nodding at me in a minute. One thing I do want to talk about, and I know that you guys, because of the whole way Honest Bottle is, you've reduced your scope massively, haven't you, as far as your carbon compared to other bottles, and it's obviously made in the UK, which reduces things massively as well. What really fascinates me is that for many retailers, their scope 3 is the suppliers, scope 1 and scope 2. And actually, when you look at, which equates to about 95% of retailers' business. So if a retailer is going to hit their target, so they've got their nice 2030, 2050 targets where they're saying they're going to reduce stuff dramatically, it's all the suppliers that are here in this room that are actually going to enable them to do that. Otherwise, they can't hit their targets, which means that everybody else has got to get on that journey to enable the retailers to hit their targets. Yep. And are you seeing that with retail? Are you talking to retail about this?
Yeah, well, in terms of like
like helping them with, would they choose you versus other brands because of that?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I mean, we sell these. We've got 8 colours, and we sell them as like our stock colours. But then we also can do custom branding. So I've seen a big market for that because helping businesses, even if they're not retailers, helping businesses to put their mark on something and even implement, say, reuse in the workplace so that employees aren't using any single use is a great thing. So it's helping them to do that. And yeah, I have seen that definitely they're looking at ours against others because of the sustainability factors as well. Because yeah, of course, that does make them look good as well, and it makes that they're doing good things too. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's lots of the different, we've got obviously the Made in Britain status. That has been bigger than what I anticipated. I thought that the fact that it's from recycled material would be the biggest one, but people actually love, it's locally made.
Yeah, we're tapping into an interest, a passion, which is different but similar.
Yeah.
And actually your whole system can be lifted into other markets as well, can't it? So it's not like you're then going to export UK made, is that you just take the system and you partner with somebody in a local market.
Yeah, that is the idea. We have literally just launched, but the idea is, and the hope is to go globally. But with this product and with the model that we've got, because PET is so widely recycled around the world and the system's already in place, for the single-use bottles and all the recycling systems are in place there, we can essentially, instead of moving the product, you can move the tool. So you move the tool to the countries, you collect the recycled material in those countries, you manufacture it there, and then you sell it in those territories. So you're using that local loop, and yeah, we've seen a lot of interest for that.
Local hub manufacturing must make so much more sense than producing in all in one place and it being shipped around the world and stuck in a warehouse, which is again is all cost, isn't it?
Yeah, and all of this is about systems, and that's what it's systemic thinking. It's not. Don't blame plastic, blame the way that we use it.
Exactly.
We've been exploiting it. We've been using it in ways in which we go, okay, I'll use that once and I'll just throw it away. It's not plastic's fault. Like, plastic isn't the devil. It does have its place.
No. That's that. So in Norway, with this retailer, we were looking at that end-of-use problem. Norwegians love to do outdoor barbecues and show off about it. There's a lot of pride in, look at the size of my barbecue, says Brian kind of thing. Brian to Jon, and I was in a workshop and this was a massive laugh, so Norwegians were laughing about Sven versus Sven kind of thing. That's more of a Swedish name, but anyway. And we talked about whether or not to make this packaging so illuminous so that if your family left the rubbish in nature, all the other Norwegians would say, "Oi, I can see you've left your rubbish."
Yeah.
And that's just peer in terms of nudge theory.
Yeah.
So little things like embarrassing the consumer, if you left that, it's bright orange, everyone can see that you've littered the beach.
Yeah.
And I think some little things like that, because the throwaway mindset is, and that relates to when your question about scope 3 and now scope 4, which is another dimension of this. Like, how many people here are retailers versus makers of product? So retailers and then makers of product. So in terms of roughly 70-30 or maybe even 80-20. So I think the word retailing is changing. As I said before, it's from transactions and selling to guiding and supporting the consumer. And I think a new criteria is going to come back to suppliers, and that criteria is going to be like a checklist, which is, we are a retailer and we're either a small village shop or a national chain or whatever we are. We've decided to be a guide for sustainable choices, and we need to make sure that everything we buy in hits the criteria now.
Yep.
And that criteria is it made using renewable energy? Does it not affect water systems? Does it not affect natural systems? Is it recyclable, which is more important than recycled? Is the whole labour force happy and paid properly? Like, all these things, and whether it's 10 or 15 criteria, that's the new brief. Yeah. And all the suppliers then have to start providing the data and the tracking so that the retailer can report that data and say, well, on all of our shelves, we are 100% water positive or plastic positive or whatever the words are. And these are all the suppliers. So, when you get, I don't know if you have pensions, but when I get my pension, I have all the money that the pensions, the people that, the companies that are, doing the investments with money. And increasingly, they're now sticking on there, and don't worry, they're green, this one's green, that one's green, that one's green. So it's that value chain, it's that system. And I think as retailers, I think the biggest difference is when I say look at stands here, and I think that looks nice, that would look nice in my shop. And somehow it's asking yourselves the question, but what's behind the product? And what's the meaning of the product? And if this product has a value, it's the extra stuff, it's the value chain. Yeah. And I think that some of these bigger questions, they change the nature of the swing tag. They change the information on the QR code, because the consumer is going to increasingly interrogate those things. So switching to being a guide, and I think the other thing I think that we've touched on is that as retailers, it's about asking yourselves the question, do you want to take a responsibility for waste? And do you want to say, are you going to be a collector of waste? And do you want to have something inside or outside your stores that becomes a village hub for waste use? And that's more business model conversation. Yeah.
How can you have more, be part of the community?
Yes.
And I know that some of the bigger retailers actually trialing a technology that is asking suppliers to input that information. Yeah. And then that kind of comes onto a big dashboard. And the future will most likely be that they will only work with you if you then start to hit certain metrics. Today is all about information finding and partnership. Tomorrow will be more about legislation. And if you're not on that bus, then sorry, we won't work with you. And I guess one of my other questions is going to be about transparency. Actually, is as retailers starting to ask more, you have to then start asking your suppliers. Your suppliers have to ask the factory asks the farmer. But actually, eventually, over the years, all of that data will most likely be on blockchain or something. It will just be available, won't it?
Yeah, and I think dashboards. More of us are gonna want to have either an app or a retailer that has a dashboard somewhere on their website that has the levels of whether it's energy, water, natural systems, waste, plastic. They want to see how all these things are getting to the good level or going from red to green. Yeah. So that dashboarding, and the reason is because then people can share that. So I can then post it on Instagram and to say, I've done well, or I can give it to my bank and say, well, they'll probably even know, but this is how well I'm doing, or the tax office. So that data transparency, the consumer is going to increasingly need that in the future. Because I can tell you now, I can imagine, 18-year-old face recognizing another 18-year-old in a bar, in 2035, and up comes all sorts of information about them. Previous relationships, carbon footprint, water footprint, recycling levels. Yep, she's the one for me.
Years ago, we could hide. The future is there is just nowhere. There will just be nowhere to hide because we need the information to operate, don't we, to make this transition?
But I think it's very important to realise that we're also coming out of a pandemic, and consumers want some fun, and they want to treat themselves this Christmas. People want to buy stuff, they want to go on holiday. They want to, just indulge as well. So there's also this side of, I think, sustainability is rebranding itself.
Yeah.
It's moving away from we all have to dress in hemp and hug trees and live in nature. And, I'm a realist. I'm a capitalist. This is about markets. It's about business. It's about growing, but in a way that does no harm.
Yep.
And ideally regenerates the world around us. And if I can have a cheeky chocolate bar at the end of the day, great, lovely too. I think glass of wine would be nice. So, we have to also balance it up with don't give people the two Ronnie lecture every time they walk in. Also say to them, how do you create a positive experience?
Yeah.
How do you give them the information, the right products, but also say, enjoy your vodka in your bottle as well.
Yeah. Go for your walk with your wine in
Sorry,
there,
I've
that's
gone off on a
fine.
whole tangent of vodka and water bottles for some weird reason, but you get my point.
Yeah, no, I totally get your point.
I'm not an alcoholic, by the way. Just to make that really clear.
It's just about being conscious, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I tried Veganuary and I loved that. And, you get all these sort of like questions, or are you vegan? Do you do this? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I don't see myself as that, but I see myself as conscious.
Yeah.
And yes, you
That's
just
it.
have to make conscious decisions.
Yeah.
And work that in with your life and not, of course, obviously veganism, great. If you want to do that,
Yeah.
absolutely fab. But if all of us did little bits, then it would be,
Yeah.
it'd be a much better place.
Yes.
Totally. So I know we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. I wanted to know, Georgia, what trends are coming through within the world of waste? Because I think there's a lot of investment happening in waste manufacturing, and as in waste plants now, because we know that that's the future of where we're most likely going to be able to get our materials from. So do you see lots of trends happening in that sector?
I mean, being able to get, there's a lack of food grade recycled plastics. So obviously this is food grade recycled plastics, but there's not so many around that you're able to get that waste easily. It's very hard to come by. And I think, what we've been talking about, like creating value from waste. So I think I mentioned before that we created the Simply Cup scheme, so creating value out of disposable paper cups. And, having the system in place already and sort of working on that, being able to recycle the disposable cups and going up against, the biodegradable that's like products that are coming in. You've got the biodegradable cups and whatever, but I don't a lot of them maybe, but you're kind of some of them you make a bit of a super plastics because you're blending them with different materials that can't really degrade. And if you, throw it in your garden, it's not just going to degrade like an apple would. Yeah. So when I was back working with Simply Waste, we saw, not to name like any brands, but there was a particular brand that came out with all the biodegradable like packaging, and it was an absolute nightmare for waste management companies because we had the system in place to be able to recycle paper and to be able to recycle plastics, and that was already there. And these biodegradable packaging was almost like a bit of a, it was kind of better for landfill because it would be better if it ended up in a landfill site. But we went away from landfill so much that the food recycling reprocessors were like, what are we meant to do with all of this? Like, we can't recycle all of this. Like, we need compostable materials, and that caused like a big issue. But anyway, so going back to the disposable cups, like we created this solution nationwide to get the value from disposable cups and turn them into circular products. We're actually working on a European scheme now, which is soon to launch. So we're working with a few big brands starting in France and the Netherlands as well. So trying to create that value from waste and more segregation really, so that you can get that value. Yeah.
Amazing. And Tom, as far as that final thought when it comes to this topic at retail for the audience, is there one final thought that you could give everybody from
I'll open up a door versus close a door. You said the word regenerative.
Yeah.
And that for me is a lot more interesting than sustainable. So sustainability means do no harm, net zero. So don't damage people and planet.
Yeah.
Regenerative means elevate people and planet.
Yeah, totally.
And I think, not to go into that as a whole other hour, but I'd have a look at the word regenerative and think, is that a sexier goal than sustainable? Because it's more interesting, it's more innovation.
Yeah.
and it's going way beyond the keeping things the way they are, which is sustainable. So make sure, get to a point where you can say we do no harm across all the different things we talked about, and then go further and break through and start to regenerate people and planet. And that's a whole different game. But that, for me, is where I think, have a look at Tazot, T-A-Z-O-T, their new campaign for regenerative tea. It's really funny, but it's really good. Yeah.
Well, tea is, because it's, it's biomatter. Oh, before we let these amazing people go, does anybody have any questions? Go on. Oh, have we got a microphone at all? Sorry.
Hi, thanks so much, guys. That was amazing. Really, really insightful. We work at a garden centre trying to do things really differently. A question for you, really, Tom. You talk about consumers, and obviously you talk about the sort of young age group, and I also have an 11-year-old son who's constantly holding me to account. We're dealing with a much older demographic, wildly set in their ways. Every product that I put in that I would call a sort of sustainable hero, it doesn't sell. We keep it in, we do loads of branding, VM, marketing around it, and we have it as a sort of accent product of where we're heading and where we want to take our consumers. But I'm interested in your thoughts on how you change the mindset of a consumer that is quite set in its ways. They're not 11, they're not on TikTok, they're not on Instagram, and they've
nothing to prove.
They've nothing to prove, and they've done in an industry that's also quite set in its ways, you know, very behind when it comes to sort of female diverse leadership, etc., etc. So we've broken down a lot of barriers, but we still have a long way to go. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
I got asked this question once by a very big retailer, and my colleague who was with me said they won't be here for long, so don't worry. I can't say that, but that's a really bad answer. But I think you need to look at, as you say, their life stage, and you know, if they are I'm guessing 65, 70 plus maybe, they're in a stage of their life where, you know, and they're probably baby boomers, and that generation in particular wants to enjoy their life now. They are into the Teslas and all these kind of things because they can afford them, but there is this real sense of why do I need to change? If something works and I've been using it for 40 years, why do I need to change something that might not have the same efficacy or the same usage? So there needs to be a product proof point, to your point, right? This is actually a better product versus sustainable. And if it's a better product and it works better, they'll probably switch versus do the right thing by the planet, because that's not as big to them as possible. The other thing is, if they've got grandchildren, I think I've heard some socioeconomic psychology theory that in the last 20, 30 years of one's life, you do start to think, what am I leaving behind? What's my legacy? And not to give them a whole legacy package, but talk to them about, what are you leaving behind? What would your grandchildren think? But in a way that doesn't make them feel guilty, because their number one thing is, I'm retired and I want to enjoy this and I want to enjoy my passion. So it needs to be incredibly beneficial and rewarding to them and work. Yeah,
and I wonder if there is an issue with the socioeconomic. So it's quite easy taking some of our customers on a journey, and even some younger customers, it's just not. And if it's not cost effective, they won't do it. And with the recession, we've got a renewed challenge to convince people to make the right decision for the right reasons. And so our sort of premise is never to be purist. I've always said we can't do it. The business will go under if I turn purist. So we've always said, where we can, we offer a sustainable, eco-friendly alternative, and we do all the due diligence of that supplier.
That's right.
But it's really difficult, because it's all very well having these amazingly brilliant, needed, lofty ideas, but actually getting the consumer, and also your product's incredible. Do we have time to sit and tell each consumer all the merits of it? No. So we're relying on you guys to come in and tell the story to our consumer in a really quick way. So it's all of those things that we're dealing with in the cut and thrust of retail.
And I think
We've got to stop.
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry.
We'll talk after. Okay.
So sorry, Rosanna's like. We'll all
Thank
be over here. So if anybody
Yeah,
wants
yeah.
to come and talk to any of us, please do, because I know that they've got the next session now.
Thank
So
you very
thank you so much, Tom and Georgia, and thank you everybody for being here today. And yeah, we can carry on a conversation. So thank you very much. Thank you.